Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is just eat meat, and that's what you should do. But if you're hiking or road tripping or stuck at work and you want something nutritious that is just meat, fat, and possibly salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. I like this product not only because it is pure meat, but also because I really want the carnivore market to thrive as well. The more we support meat only products, the more people will make meat only products, and this will bring this into the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to check out, then take a look and use my discount code HTC to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right. Thanks, guys.
Hey everyone, we're back with another episode of the To Carnivore podcast and YouTube series. We're joined again by Dr. Anthony Chaffee, MD, the Plant Free MD. Anthony, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Likewise. And we've also got Jake from Wolki Farm here, who's a regenerative farmer and is going to tell us all about the cool stuff that he's been up to. So welcome, Jake.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely.
Jake, can you tell us about yourself and all the different things that you're doing?
Sure. I've got a really varied background, and even my current operations are quite all over the place. So I run and manage a bicycle shop with a 7-day-a-week cafe restaurant inside of it that I own with my family.
Wow.
Nice.
And when I left school, I worked with my father for 4 years. He had a record store. My dad hates music, and he bought a record store. So that's been one of my family's things. We're 50 years self-employed in Australia over 3 generations, and we joke that it's because we're unemployable. But one of our things has always been to buy businesses and industries that we're not interested in. And the thought process behind that is so our own prejudice and bias doesn't, cloud our view as to what the market's demanding.
Wow.
A lot of people that love music that might buy a record store fill the shelves up with rap music when they're living in an older area, and they should be having country music and classical music for their markets. You got to meet the market, right? And then a few years ago, I've had pretty screwed up health, nothing chronic, and not even realizing that I wasn't that healthy. But in hindsight, I'm like, I was really screwed up. I remember being probably 7 or 8 years old, and I used to yell out, and Dad would come and help me peel the sheets off my legs in the morning because I'd scratch my legs in my sleep and they were stuck to my legs with blood. So just cover skin rashes all the time. I haven't in the last sort of 18 months, I've been breathing through my nose for the first time in my whole life. Allergic to dairy, intolerance to gluten, like all this stuff that's just sort of normal nowadays. And when my wife conceived our first child, I've got 2 sons and a 3rd child on the way due in July. Nice. I thought, we've got to do better. We've got this child on the way. I'm a little bit screwed up. I don't want the baby to be screwed up. We can't be a basket case. So what are we going to do about it? Started organic gardening in my backyard. Ended up getting 40 chooks out on a lease block, moving the chickens around, moving the cows around. That was in 2019. Fast forward to today, the farm butchery business has 4 full-time staff. We're producing beef, pork, chicken, lamb, and eggs direct to consumer. We breed our own cattle. We've got honeybees. We've got a market garden and a little house orchard. I've just stocked my dams with fish. We've got quite a bustling sort of holistic regenerative farm. And, I remember setting myself a goal for New Year 2020 that I wanted to grow enough food that I could feed my family for a month. Just 1 month. I want to do a 4-week stint where everything we eat, I produced it, and we're probably 2.5 years in of complete abundance, and we're feeding our whole family everything we need, plus 100 other families in the region. So that New Year's resolution steamrolled.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's very good, and congratulations. You had no background in farming before that. You just got into it out of all scratch.
Yep, first gen farmer, educated on YouTube.
Yeah,
so good.
That's always the way. I have a buddy of mine. He's a consultant neurosurgeon now, but he's saying he's just like, yeah, I got my whole education on YouTube. I just learned how to be a neurosurgeon on YouTube, just watching all these videos from these great neurosurgeons around the world.
Wow.
Videos and their surgeries and talking about the different ailments. So yeah, there's a lot of good information out there.
Yeah, it's incredible. And obviously you can follow your gut, go down rabbit holes at your own pace, see what feels right. You know, there's not a set curriculum in front of you. That's just this status quo that you've got to accept. So I would never have gone to university to study something because I don't like those parameters. That's why I didn't go to university, I guess.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
How did you, Jake, how did you get started? So did you buy a plot of land? What was it?
So I don't own any land. I'm currently leasing 120 hectares, which is about 300 acres. There are 3 different titles that I lease off different people. The main home block that I've got all my, I guess, intensive enterprises on, the chickens, the pigs, because you got to put out feed and check them every day. They're on my father's 100 acres. So I leased that block of land off my parents. And that was where I got my start. I went and bought a caravan on Facebook for $200 or something, and I put it in the paddock. Mum was mortified. It was this old rickety, rusty, crooked, tan, you know, just a disgusting $200 caravan. And I put 40 chooks in it, and I started moving it around the paddocks every couple of days, trying to figure out this pastured chicken thing, hauling water, hauling feed, mucking it out every week. It was an absolute nightmare, but I loved every minute of it.
Good man.
That's awesome. And so you do regenerative agriculture. Can you explain what the difference between regenerative agriculture is to just normal livestock agriculture?
Sure. Well, regenerative agriculture is probably a real tip in the hat to how our ancestors did it before everything became, you know, pharmaceuticalized and commoditized. We're not interested. Our spin on it is we want to increase the commons. So when we're farming, we're looking at there's common resources that we all share, whether we like it or not, and we want to increase the quality and abundance of them. So the normal commons that people speak about are air quality and water quality. There are a couple examples of commons. You've got the water table under your farm or the stream that rolls through your farm, and your farm can either play a role in degrading that or improving that. But we push the needle a little bit harder. We look at soil as a commons. You know, it's not for us to just destroy the soil for future generations and think that it's ours because we've got the freehold on the land. And I also look at things like social health of my community, you know, my community's health and our social impact, the financial viability of my business and the wages I can pay and the businesses that I can lean on to support. For me, they're all an extension of the commons. So that's probably not the way most people describe regenerative. They'll say, you know, we're chemical free and our animals are outdoor, and we do all that. But what are you working towards? It's one thing to have animals outside feeding them GMO free corn. You know, I like to talk about the values that underpin it. And we want to produce food for people with no externalized costs. So cheap food, commodity food is subsidized by straight up government subsidies, animal suffering in feedlots and factories, the reliance and use of pesticides, herbicide. You guys know the word side means kill, and we've got fungicide, pesticide, herbicide, insecticide, miticide. We've got all these herbicides. We don't want anything to have to pick up the tab of our mismanagement, laziness, neglect, or paradigm. So we work really hard organically to bring all those costs in and work with nature, and then deliver people a pork chop on their table that they can use to fuel their families.
Yeah. And that's and these sorts of things largely, you know, mimic or reproduce the same sort of things that you see in migratory patterns with animals. They're coming through, they're not overgrazing, you're just sort of eating this, and then like you say, you move over to different areas, so you're not completely destroying the resources and or diminishing them and depleting them. As far as the soil goes, like you say, I mean, animals play a very important role in that. The animals are eating down the plant material, and then they're recycling a lot of those nutrients into the soil. So as these animals come through and eat these things down and then leave their waste, they're actually improving the soil. So you can do this in a way that actually makes the soil better instead of slowly degrading and degrading and degrading. And that, I would imagine, if the soil is getting better and better every generation of animals that you have every season, that's going to make the nutrient component of the meat that you're producing much better as well, I would imagine.
Well, they're the sort of things that we're starting to test with a state certified lab so we can benchmark our nutrition, because we do soil tests, but my customers don't directly eat the soil and I don't feed the soil to my family, but the soil does have a relationship with the proteins that we are eating. So instead of just doing soil tests, we're also starting to do nutritional paneling on our eggs, beef, pork, chicken, lamb, everything. And we want to open source our soil tests and our nutritional paneling on our range of SKUs on our website. Every year we want to update that and offer it to people. It's interesting what you said also, Doctor, about the animals having the ability to improve fertility. And to push back slightly, only ever so slightly, that's the only way we're going to build fertility. There's no animal-free system that improves fertility without synthetic and oil inputs or an exorbitant amount of, human labor and burning diesel. We need these animals to do it because we've been brainwashed in this last 10, 15 years that animals are somehow bad for the environment. But news check, animals are the environment. Yeah. It's the mismanagement of animals that can be bad for the environment. So we need to get back to the source of the seed, as my friend Texas Slim likes to say, and look at the way these animals move in nature, like you said, the migratory patterns. So we move our flock of sheep and our herd of cattle every single day, and 3-4 days behind where they are is our flock of 1,000 chickens, combing through their manure, upcycling those nutrients, breaking the insect life cycle. And we're just trying to, tip the hat to nature and be patient observers and go, we're going to work in with you best we can.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, you're totally right. I mean, as talking to Dr. Peter Ballerstedt, who's in this industry, he's a PhD in forage agronomy, very interesting guy, has a degree in animal nutrition as well. So he was saying is that you cannot have plant agriculture without animal agriculture. It can't exist, and you do deplete and degrade the soil with all of these just crop after crop after crop after crop. I mean, even in the Bible, it said you only do that for 7 years, and then you have to leave it, for a year and allow animals to come on and eat the things ground, and you have to leave it for a year, and that's that principle. And they noticed that thousands of years ago that that's something that you have to do, and we've forgotten that, and we've said, oh no, you just keep doing it. As long as you can dump a bunch of chemicals on it, a bunch of manure on it, you should be fine. But it doesn't work like that, and we lose a lot of topsoil. We lose a lot of these nutrients. The soil now is much more deplete than it was 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 100 years ago, and that's a direct result of that. And it's only the manure that's even holding that together. And you have, like you say, petroleum-based fertilizers and nutrients that are going into this. That's maintaining it, that's allowing it to just sort of exist, but that's not replenishing it, that's not revitalizing it like you would with this sort of regenerative approach. I do wonder, have you come across Dr. Allan Savoury, who does a lot of this sort of stuff with like large herds regenerating?
So we just hosted a Savory grazing workshop at our farm last month. Yeah, I've read the book. I've actually got my grazing chart here on the ground next to me, my Savory grazing chart. The great thing about what Allan Savoury has done is he's come up with a decision-making system that helps you farm looking into the future, and it takes out a lot of the guesswork. To have to know your context and your goals, and then to have a framework where you can put stop gaps in your system. If it doesn't rain for 30 days, here's the decision I'm going to have to make. If it doesn't rain for 60 days, because most of us get pretty good at looking in the paddock going, I reckon that paddock could feed my 60 cows for the next 2 weeks. But beyond that, you can't run all the different enterprises off the top of your head. So I love what Allan Savoury's done. He's one of the OGs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And as you're saying, you can either do things and make your land and water sources better or worse, and that's something that Savory has done. He's literally reversed deserts by using a lot of large scale animal agriculture, livestock bunched and moving like this would a migratory herd of buffalo or whatever, and they just do things a little bit differently. And they're defecating and urinating on their food supply. So it's just like, okay, so they're gonna have to keep moving so they don't overgraze, they don't overwork it, and they're getting all these nutrients just in a certain area. And that in his his property in Zimbabwe, it's like right in the middle of the desert there, and it's beautiful. I mean, it's just this verdant jungle and everything, and it has tightened up the borders of his rivers and things like that. they're holding the borders of the river, so they don't flood every year and they don't wash out, and they're getting better groundwater penetration. The rain doesn't just wash everything off, doesn't wash the seeds off, doesn't wash the topsoil off. It hits and it sinks and it goes into the ground. And so his just little area is this green oasis in the middle of this, otherwise barren desert. It's pretty amazing.
And I bet his stocking rate compared to the desert around him would be absolutely through the roof, which demonstrates to us that it's not the cow, it's the how.
Yeah. And then with that, all these animals come as well. So now elephants have come to that area, other things that more, and then the more animals that come in, the better it is. And it just becomes better and better and better and better. So it's this positive feedback that just makes the land better, makes it better for the animals and for the plants and everything involved. I mean, like you said, animals aren't bad for the environment. Animals are the environment. All these animals have existed for millions of years, some a lot longer than that. Like crocodiles have been around like 250 million years, something insane like that. And so, these things have been around for a very long time, and they've co-evolved and coexisted with the plant world during that entire time. And you start taking out one major piece of that, namely the animals, and the plants suffer as well. But people don't realize that these are complex systems that rely on each other. And you mess with those. We used to know that. I was taught that as a kid. You mess with things, it's delicate balance in nature, and you mess with that, and everything falls apart. I mean, we've seen that here in Australia with cane toads. I mean, what bright spot tried that one out? Like, oh, we have these bugs here. Well, let's bring in some toads. Toads eat bugs. That's great. And what kind of toads? It doesn't matter. That's whatever. Cane toads, great. It's horribly poisonous, killing all these animals, dogs, and freshwater crocodiles that are eating them. Well, that's devastating. And then there's all these koalas. Who wants all these damn koalas? These fuzzy little things, not doing anything, not being productive, And so why don't we just reduce their breeding potential by giving them chlamydia? Because chlamydia can make you sterile. That's a great idea. Why don't we go around and give a bunch of koalas chlamydia? Oh, now you have a lot of koalas that have chlamydia. And like, oh, look at that. They actually do have sex. And so now they're passing as chlamydia. Now there's this horrible epidemic of koalas with chlamydia. And now the populations are dropping below what they want. So now these idiots are going around, giving antibiotics to, koalas in nature. It's just you're causing more problems.
Frisky little buggers.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we've got one population here in Australia that are on an island that are being used to bring fresh genetics that aren't infected back into the mainland because they've been waterlocked.
Okay. Wow.
That's worth a shot.
But it's just a problem that should never have existed, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's it's the problem of any complex system. You mess with a complex system, it's the law of unexpected results, or I'm blanking on it. But anyway, you mess with a complex system, and you're going to get a lot of changes that you were not going to be able to expect or anticipate, and there are going to be a lot of problems. You just leave these things alone and let them work.
Yeah, for sure. Jake, you mentioned that you've struggled with your health for a long time, and then you sort of said to your wife, all right, it's time to do something about it. What was it that made you link nutrition and what you're putting into your body with your health? Because not everybody comes to that obvious conclusion, seemingly obvious.
I think most people know, and they're just in denial because they're so addicted to sugar, carbs, smokes, and alcohol. My wife's a healthy person. I have not been a healthy person. I'm a lot better than I used to be. That's for sure. But I knew that if I had KFC for lunch, I had a wet cough all afternoon. I knew if I had a Snickers bar before lunch that I broke out in acne. I was, and even still, I remember being, 14 or 15, sitting in the doctor's clinic trying to find something for my acne because I didn't like all my pimples. I thought it took me off the dating market in high school. So I thought, can you give me a pill for this? And the doctor said, just the local family GP, who, as I remember, was an extremely overweight man, be that as it may. He said, oh, have you noticed if there's anything environmental that might cause your pimples? And I said, I think maybe when I eat junk food, all the whiteheads pop out. And he's just sort of given me a slight pushback, and he goes, well, do you think you'd want to eat less junk food and see how that goes? And I just said, no. And he wrote me a script for Accutane.
Oh, Jesus.
Which just screwed me up. You know, people used to stop my mum on the street when I was in the bassinet, and they thought her husband was a dark man because I looked like a little Filipino baby. I had such a tan. And when I got on that stuff, I was like Lord Voldemort. I couldn't go in the sun for about the next 10 years without shriveling up and peeling. It took me, I wasn't on it very long, thank God, but, you know, and that's not that doctor's problem. That's my problem. But a little bit of, I guess, you know, these people, when we go to see them as patients, they do have authority, and a little bit of, I think the pushback and the encouragement could have been a little bit stronger. And, you know, and I'm the problem here. I knew what was causing it, but I do think in the right context with the right person that they could have fast-tracked the recovery for myself. But, you know, it's not a blame game. It's not about a poverty mindset. It's about, hey, guys, we're here at the farm creating healing food. Who wants some?
Yeah.
There's, you know, for every problem, there's solutions. So let's get on with it.
Yeah. And what have you noticed now? What are you eating now yourself? And like, what have you noticed as far as your health benefits?
Heaps of kale, broccoli. Come on, guys. My wife is 20 weeks pregnant, and about 4 or 5 months before we conceived, we went pretty strict carnivore.
Nice.
And with our first child, you know, this is pretty intimate stuff here, but we're all amongst friends and no one else is going to hear this, right? No. For our first child, we tried for about a year to conceive, and I was 23 and my wife was 20, and we went to the GP and we said, what's wrong with us? You know, why can't we get pregnant? And she said, how long have you been trying? We said, a year. She just laughed at us and kicked us out of the room. But the reality is she said, try longer, come back in 2 years and then you've got a problem. But the reality is in school, you're told, look at a girl sideways. If you're not wearing a condom, she's going to be pregnant. No one talks about your cycles and your hormones and your mood and the right day of the week and peak ovulation and all this stuff as a farmer that you become intimately aware of. And then our diet, like just eat our diet, well, my diet especially, just full of these inflammatory foods, and cutting out all this junk was already pretty healthy. But, you know, we got rid of the last little bit of pasta and the little bit of sourdough on the weekend or something. And we conceived first try. My wife's had an amazing pregnancy so far. 0 morning sickness. She's working in the kitchen as a chef, as a line, like in our restaurant. She's doing 30 plus hours a week, running the household, helping out with the farm, full of energy, bounces out of bed in the morning. And to sort of segue back, we're now not strictly just meat, but we're basically just meat, dairy, eggs, and a little bit of fruit.
Nice. Yeah, really good. And yeah, that's the thing that I've spoken to a lot of women that do carnivore pregnancies. Some women have had horrible morning sickness in previous pregnancies. And then as soon as they stop eating all the other stuff and just focus on meat, it just goes away. Not everyone gets that. Some people get like meat aversions. But the majority of people find that they get this massive benefit. And spoken to a number of friends of mine. One lady had hyperemesis, so she was having projectile vomiting every single day for 32 weeks. And then she was just sort of seeing my stuff more and more on Facebook at that time. And she just said, you know what, screw it, I'm going to try it. And just started just eating meat that day, gone, no more mornings. So it was really just her body's just like, get this stuff out of here. We don't want this crap anymore. The meat, like, yep, bring it in. And then her next pregnancy was flawless. And she felt a bit queasy for a couple of weeks, and that was it. She didn't vomit once. And now she's on her 3rd carnivore pregnancy, and she's feeling great. She has no problem. So that's something that I think is a direct result of eating something. You're much more sensitive to eating the wrong thing when you're pregnant. You know, your body's trying to protect the baby, and it's just like, hey, get this stuff out of here. This is bad for you. You know, like what animal in nature gets morning sickness and is just vomiting for 9 months out on the Serengeti, just puking? You know, you have pregnant lions, pregnant gazelles. You know, it's fight or die out there. And so if you were completely debilitated with fast swollen ankles and just vomiting just all day every day, like, that's a recipe for death in the wild. So it does seem a bit strange. And so it's great to see more people like your wife who are having much healthier pregnancies, and which I think was going to lead to much healthier babies.
100%. We not long read Dr. Catherine Shanahan's book on epigenetics, deep nutrition, and the generational consequences of lazy eating are frightening. Like when you learn that information, that should be a year 7 textbook as far as I'm concerned, because you realize that your negligence is giving your kids a really bad platform for the rest of their life. You know, it's not just you. I spoke to Dr. Max Goldhain about this. It's to explain it to someone like myself who's not medically trained and a bit of a dullard. It's like putting a tattoo on your arm and then your baby gets born with a matching tattoo.
Yeah,
you know, like they are taking your contributing to their starting platform. Interesting hearing you talk about that lady with morning sickness. I had one of my customers reach out to me that she's been having horrible morning sickness, and the only thing that she's been able to eat that hasn't made her throw up horrendously has been raw eye fillet out of my freezers.
Nice. Yeah, very good.
She's thriving.
Yeah, really good. That's it's interesting you say that, and I totally agree. Like the whole epigenetic thing is something that people don't know enough about. But you have these epigenetic effects. So epigenetics means that you're triggering different genes. So everyone has a compilation of genes, but some are on, some are off. And sometimes you have little some introns and exons and these sorts of things change the actual protein that you code for, right? So in different tissue and different cells or at different times, you may cut out different parts of this protein and make this version of this protein of this gene, and maybe you turn it off sometimes, maybe you'll make a different one other times. So there's all these effects on your genes on which proteins you're going to make for your code. You don't just churn out all these proteins. You get signals that tell which ones to get printed at a given time and at a given rate. And so those are serious changes, right? So if you just have the code for something, that's one thing. But if you're turning things on or off in inappropriate time, that's going to seriously affect your health. And the crazy thing is that this actually has generational knock-on effects. Like you say, you get a tattoo and then your kid has a tattoo. And sometimes it actually magnifies in the later generation. So you get a tattoo on your arm and all of a sudden the kid has a big sleeve and then his kid has full body tats, and so it just sort of compounds. There was interesting work, I've mentioned this before, but it's a Dr. Pottinger, and it's called Pottinger's Cats. It's very interesting look at this sort of generational epigenetic effects on diet specifically, because you can actually do some science with animal nutrition. You can't do it with humans. Human nutrition is pretty useless, but animal nutrition, you can actually do a lot of really cool things. So this guy was doing this in sort of the 30s and 40s and looking at different cats, and he just found that they were very different health-wise, eating raw meat versus cooked meat, and that the cooked meat cats were much less healthy, and they weren't as playful and vigorous and all these sorts of things. They were doing surgeries on them for other experiments, and they just found the ones that were eating cooked meat weren't surviving the surgeries, but the raw meat ones were. So they're like, okay, let's look into that. And so they had a lot of cats and they bred them generationally, and they looked at their behavior. The ones that were eating raw meat were much more frisky, much more interested in sex with the opposite gender, and procreating. That's the definite. That's the biological purpose of life is procreation, right? And so they were actively doing that. The other cats weren't as vigorous, weren't as interested in copulating, and their kids were a bit worse. So they looked at the skeletons, they looked at the bone structures. They started off at the same level, but then the next generation of raw meat cats sort of got more developed, better developed cheekbones and brains and bone structure and everything like that, and they were bigger. And then the ones that were cooked, they were eating cooked meat, they were actually a little smaller, the next generation, and their brains were smaller and their cheekbones weren't as developed. Mm-hmm. And bone mineralization went from 14% down to like 7%, something like that. And so that was strange. And then the third generation, they're even smaller brains, even less developed zygomatic arch and cheekbones. And now their mineralization was only 3%. Instead, it was like their bones were like foam rubber. And they were just getting all these breaks and all these fractures. Like one cat had something over 40 fractures in its skeleton. It was just appalling. That was a poor little thing. And they were just not interested in playing. They were not interested in procreating. The ones that did and were able to successfully mate either didn't get pregnant or had stillbirths and weren't able to carry to term. And none of them, they could not get a fourth generation live cats, couldn't at all. The raw meat ones were doing great the whole way through. Then they said, okay, so where that ends, right? And that's why you say, like, when people say, oh, well, we're probably eating X, Y, and Z. And if you have this deficient, blah, blah, it doesn't make sense that if we were eating meat, we would be deficient, because you can't make it through the ice ages with that effect, because eventually you're going to run out and people are just going to die out, right? So we must have been able to do very, very well with just eating meats. That's an aside. So then they put these unhealthy cats, these third gen cats, on raw meat, and they got much healthier, and they were able to sort of do better, and for their whatever they developed into, they were able to thrive as much as they could. And then they were able to procreate. But the thing was, it didn't just come back the next generation. They didn't just all of a sudden, oh, now they're healthy again. It took 4 generations before they were able to breed back to getting the skeletal structure and bone mineral density and facial structures, brain size, and behavior of the raw meat cat. So it actually has multi-generational effect. Every generation got better, but they didn't get to where they were supposed to be. They should have been the whole time for 4 generations. And I think, unfortunately, we're sort of that third gen cat, and our kids are all going to be better, and their kids are going to be better than that. And hopefully, eventually, we'll be able to breed back to what we were supposed to be, which is a hell of a lot taller, hell of a lot smarter, much bigger brains, and much more robust in general.
It's just such an important thing for people to hear, because once you hear that, you've got this duty of care flick in your brain for your progeny and your bloodlines, and you should lose sleep if you hear that and you're prior to breeding and you're still drinking thick shakes and binge drinking on the weekend and eating KFC for lunch. Like, you should be losing sleep about your behavior.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And, if people talk about the different reasons why you eat plants or don't eat meat or whatever, and that's fine. But, any sort of ethical qualms really go out the window when you're okay, compared to what? We don't really have an option here. You can't have optimal health without eating meat. You just can't. Even with supplements and all these sorts of things, you just can't. And so if you want to do that to yourself, that's your business. But imposing this on not only your children, but everyone else's children is pure evil. You are not allowed to do that. You are not allowed to destroy a child's life and generations of children after that, just because it makes you feel better and warm and fuzzy at night.
Well,
it's simply not your.
It's sanctimony, isn't it? Like, you're offering your child, in the court of popular opinion almost. I've got family raising their infants and toddlers on vegan diets, which, what a contrast. I'm over here, basically carnivore farm. I grow it all on the land, and then you've got the vegan family over there. But it's sad. I've last time they were here, I weighed they're the same age as my children, so I weighed my kids and measured their height on the wall, and then I did the other ones. And, there's a lot of variance, isn't there, that could affect those sorts of outcomes, but it was night and day.
Yeah, and that'll compound as they age as well. So there was interesting, because in nutrition, it's all pretty useless information in human nutrition, and it's all biased by the Seventh-day Adventists, who really invented the field of dietetics in about 1917. They actually founded organizations to look into this, but they have a religious bent, and they think that meat is sinful and that it makes you lustful, and so you shouldn't eat it because it's evil and it's wrong. So that they already have a bias, and that's a very big bias. And so they're putting out a lot of these things, and it has a very specific bent. And so people say, oh, well, when you eat more vegetables, you get all these better outcomes. They've never compared that to a whole food meat-based diet. So you don't have these studies where you're looking at whole food meat-based diet versus whole food plant-based diet and these things that come out. It's always, well, increase the amount of vegetables that you eat. Okay, and these guys do better. And the people that eat sort of more vegetables, okay, but what else are they doing? They're probably more health conscious in general. They're not smoking as much. They're not drinking as much. They're exercising more. That is a thing. And these are confounding factors that confuse the issue. And so they're not comparing like to like. They're comparing apples to oranges. And so if you're not comparing whole food plant-based diet and a whole food meat-based diet, you have no comparison. You have no study that actually matters in that field. The only study that looked at that I know of was published in 1931 in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, and it was very interesting. They looked at 2 African populations that were living naturally, and the Maasai, which are predominantly carnivore, just eating eggs, meat, and blood of their cattle. And then I think it's the Akikiu, that's how you pronounce it, was a neighboring tribe that was very interesting because they're very similar genetic populations, because they actually were next to each other. So there was intermarriage and interbreeding. So they had a very similar genetic heritage, but they were eating largely whole food vegetarian diets. And this is a vegan's dream, right? There was no pesticides to speak of in this part of Africa, especially in 1931. And so they were eating largely whole food plant-based diets that aren't these new GMO, constructs that have come out of nowhere. These like real plants that they've figured out that they could eat. And then the Maasai, they're just eating meat and dairy, and that's it. What were their differences? The Maasai were on average, same genetic population or similar enough, on average 5 inches taller for adult males, right? Massive. Larger brain size in the Maasai, less illness, less chronic disease, less nutritional deficiencies, less mineral and vitamin deficiencies. They checked the blood of all of them. They found a lot of deficiencies, and there's just very low numbers, a lot of anemia and low iron in the Akikiu. They get sick a lot easier. They didn't heal from wounds as fast, and they found that just by just replacing the nutrients that they found that they were deficient in wasn't enough to actually get the health benefits that they found as contrasted with the Maasai. But when they put them on meat and just started feeding them meat, they did get all of those health benefits, and all these problems that they had before went away. So that's really the best one that we have, and it's pretty damn good. And so after that, if we're going to have any meaningful conversation in this, the only studies that we should be doing now are not just, oh, here's a survey, do you eat more or less of this? You compare people who eat a whole food plant-based diet that every vegan would agree this is the right way to do it, and a whole food meat-based diet, which all of us would say that's the right way to do it. Those are the only comparison that matter in this discussion, because that's what we're discussing. That's what we're saying. You shouldn't eat meat. You shouldn't do a carnivore diet because it's bad for you. Plants are better. Okay, well, we don't have a study that shows that. So that's a comparison we need to do.
Yeah, well, comparing whole food vegan diet to people who eat out of the aisles of a supermarket is just a nonsense.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
Meat lovers pizzas, and they're claiming to be a big meat eater. This sort of contrast.
But it's not even meat lovers pizza. It's just pizza, period. Because sometimes the toppings are meat, therefore pizza is meat. What we're talking about, some of these epidemiological studies, they look at surveys, they say, well, how much of this have you eaten? How much of that have you eaten? And they say, oh, when you eat less meat, things get better. In some of these studies, a lot of studies say the exact opposite. They actually, no, they don't have any problems. In fact, a lot of studies, there was one that looked at 175 different countries, corrected for a lot of confounding factors like socioeconomic factors as well. And they found that the more meat people ate, the longer they lived, the healthier they were. All right. So it's not that all the studies say this. That's nonsense. And the studies that do say that are pretty garbage. And so they look at these things and say, okay, well, do you eat pizza? How often do you eat pizza? Oh, okay, eat pizza 3 times a week. Well, sometimes there's meat on pizza, therefore meat is pizza. So that counts as a serving of meat. That's nonsense. That is a clear intentional deception. And so that's what you tend to find in these epidemiological studies, most of which are pushed forward by Loma Linda Medical Center and the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So Loma Linda is run by the Seventh-day Adventists, and these schools of dietetics, which the Seventh-day Adventists founded. And so they are going to manipulate the data and manipulate the studies to get the outcome that they want. As we know from any sort of industry research, the person paying, the only thing that we know from more than anything as a certainty in research is that the person paying for the study generally gets a favorable outcome in the study, or else it doesn't get published. There are studies that go out and say, yeah, this shows your product's bad, let's publish it. And they say, you do that, we'll sue your ass. And so they never make it, And so that's the thing. So their industry is pushing a plant-based agenda. And what do you know? All their studies are showing that plant-based is better. Like, I'm shocked. I'm seriously shocked. I can't believe this is happening.
Switching gears a little, Jake, I saw you on the news talking about the world's first 24/7 staffless butchery. What is going on here? It sounds amazing.
So about 2 years into our farming journey, so we're raising the animals on farm, processing them and selling the meat direct to consumer. We're not selling anything off into the commodity market. It's all going direct to consumer.
Awesome.
And the way the food supply chain here in Australia works is you drop it off at your local abattoir, which I think the Americans call processing centers. It's where the animal gets slaughtered. And then it gets consigned to a local butchery that's got a certified boning room where they can do the butchery work. And then you can pick it up there and you've ticked all the boxes along the supply chain. So you end up dealing with ma and pa butcheries to receive your animals, cut them up how you want it done. And the reality is these stores don't have much capacity for volume. You know, they're normally, butcheries are generally quite small businesses in terms of footprint. You know, refrigeration is expensive to run, expensive to set up. So a great local butcher was doing a body of beef a month and a couple pigs a month for me. And then COVID happened and the abattoir started having to do cut shifts because of, you know, instead of the guys standing 2 meters apart, they had to stand 4 meters apart, you know, whatever they had going on. So that just destroyed the local food system. Just that policy, that one policy. Guys like me, our business was kaput, finished, all done. See you later, because the abattoir didn't want to see our bodies. That's, you know, surplus to what they do. They want to buy the beef out of the paddock and sell it to the butchers over the rail. And then when I did manage to sneak onto the abattoir by bribery, you know, telling the guy running the sheet that I'll buy him a slab of beer or something, then the butcher didn't want it. And I sort of thought, you know, even when COVID's over, where I want my business to go in terms of scale and volume, because of this, you know, this drive that we have to feed people, there's still going to be no capacity. So we had to buy our own butchery. There was a store in town that was on the market. It was closed down, but it had been a previously run butchery for about 75 years in Albury. So a lot of heritage in the building and a lot of cobwebs and little rick-rack add-ons out the back that I've found over the years. So my wife and I purchased that, renovated the boning room, put some butchers in there and started cutting meat. So now we do custom processing for 15 other local farmers that sell their protein direct to consumer. So we'd cryovac it, gluten-free sausages, whatever you want, custom branded label. But to get to your point, there was a shop front out the front, which people were used to coming in and buying meat. And people kept asking me, when are you opening up the shop front? I said, well, we're never opening up the shop front. This is purely a processing facility for us. We sell the meat to the local supermarkets. We sell the meat to the local restaurants. We do monthly house deliveries, buy the meat there. And one of my friends who owns a smokehouse in town, I was talking to him in December. It must have been 2020. And he said, when are you opening up the front? I said, we're not. It's not what we're interested in. And he looked at me, he said, you'll have it open in March. And I left that room and I'm like, you dog, you know, you've waved this goalpost, this finish line in front of me. And so I madly figured out how to make it work, because the reality is all of our produce was already being sold elsewhere, basically. So we didn't have much inventory to sit out the front. It'd never justify a salary if someone's sitting there scanning it. I thought I needed to do a vending machine. And that wasn't as easy as I thought it was. I thought I could just buy a big vending machine and bolt it into the wall, but just a bit of a pain. Or then I thought I'll do like a self-checkout, like a supermarket, or buy one of those hardware units. People can come in, check themselves out. They're expensive, proprietary. So I ended up figuring out, I basically merged a 24/7 gym, you know, the access and hardware that you use at a 24/7 gym, with some interesting software that helps people self-checkout. So now I've got almost 400 members that can self-access the butchery 24/7, completely staffless. They use their unique code that they get by coming to a farm tour. The farm tours cost nothing but 3 hours of your time. I'm very greedy. I don't want to charge you $10 for the farm tour, but I want 3 hours of your undivided attention so I can give you a sermon in the pastures. And once you've managed to sit through that for 3 hours, you get a code. That's our vetting process. You know, you get a code, you come in 24/7. There's an app on your smartphone and you open the app and you scan the barcodes. You hit pay. You can pay with fiat. You can pay with Bitcoin. If you had gold bullion and you wanted to slide it under the door, I'd accept that as well.
Love it.
And then they leave. And the follow-up question is, how much theft have you had? Well, in the beginning, I thought I could handle a bit of shrinkage because I'm saving a $60,000 salary every year. So if I have $10,000 worth of theft, it's not the end of the world. I put a couple security cameras in there. I know my customers, and in over 2 years of operating, we've had zero theft.
Nice. That's awesome.
So Jake, just to sort of to recap. So how many people are members?
About 400. There's not 400 super active members. I've probably got, there'd be 20 diehards that are in there multiple times a week, and then probably another 50 that would come through on a monthly basis.
And do
this
they
is
pay
not
for
the main.
membership?
The memberships are free and the farm tools are free. It's just time.
Mm-hmm. And so they're cutting their own cuts, or like how does that work?
No, it's all pre-packaged, cryovac in the freezer.
Right, so you're coming
it.
in and grabbing what you want and things like that.
Yep. So scan it, it tallies it up, and then you tap your card. Is that right?
Well, you scan it, it tallies it up, and then you enter your card details on the app on your phone. Because you're using your phone is the hardware. You just downloaded a free app, or it syncs up to your Apple Pay or Google Pay.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah.
It's brilliant. And the quality must be unreal because they're buying direct from your farm, and it's literally animal is killed. Whereabouts is the animal killed?
Bit under an hour away.
Yeah. And then it comes to the boning room.
Yes.
It gets all chopped up and butchered, and then it goes into the fridge.
And because it's our space and we can do things the way we want, I've put a really big new cool room down the back, and I've mounted UVP lights into the ceiling, which is an ultraviolet light that sterilizes airborne bacteria that is susceptible to turning the meat too quick. So we want to hang our meat a couple of weeks to let it develop tenderness and flavor. But sometimes, especially in an active store, when you're opening and closing the doors all the day, you hang the meat for a few weeks and it can start to sweat, become a bit slimy, or get a bit of mold growth on it or something. But this UVP light's just absolutely nailed all of that bad side effects. So that's been really exciting.
Yeah, very cool. And what was I going to say? Yeah. So, and how are you able to work your price point? Because you're cutting out a lot of middlemen that probably get people better quality meat, but also might be a better price point as well. Is that right?
Well, everywhere we sell our meat, it's the same price. So there's no, because it all goes through the same label machine. You know, it all gets priced the same cut weight per kilo, whether it's at the local supermarket or the local restaurant or whatever it might be. You know, every business has its own operating costs. And even though we're staffless, we still have some operating costs, energy being a massive one. I don't know if you guys have been gobsmacked by your electricity bill lately, but I nearly fell over with my last one.
Yeah.
I suppose your margins are better, right? If somebody buys it from your store, you're getting retail margins.
If someone buys it from the shop, that's the best margin capture for us out of all of our sales outlets.
Now, there'll probably be a few people listening who might be interested, Jake. Are you doing any quarter, half, or full beasts? Is that possible?
Yeah, sure. We do heaps. I've got 3. We're filling 3 quarters this week or next week now. Coming up, we do half and whole pigs, half and whole lambs. I do a thing called a crate of chickens because we do pasture-raised chickens. So a crate of chickens is 20 whole chooks and 20 portion chooks. The bigger the order, the more I love you. I send pallet loads of meat up to Brisbane, which Brisbane's like, 1,000 Ks plus up the coast, and people get together with a few families and buy a pallet load between them. Might be $10,000 worth of meat all up, but it makes the freight really economical, and it means I can get it up there lickety split. This industry needs to scale. We've got a lot of cottage community-minded people, which is all brilliant. Like, we need small producers, but we also need some people who are ready to feed the world with this integrity-based foods that aren't, soaked in commodity inputs, antibiotics and drenches and pesticides and all of these things. So we're really excited to push the needle up a little bit and get some more produce out there.
Nice. And so you're able to obviously put it frozen and then ship it frozen in freight?
We do everything frozen. Yeah. A lot of our processing is seasonal. So like when I've got a batch of lambs coming through, I might have 80 lambs all hit the same weight at the same time. So we'll pump them all through the butchery, but then I might have no lamb for 4 or 5 months. Right. So, on one hand, in the beginning, people found the frozen, like I was bashing my head against it a little bit because people didn't like the lack of convenience. But once you explain to them about how convenient it actually is having a 600-litre chest freezer in your garage, and you've got 4 months worth of food security for your family sitting there begging to be eaten, you realize that our perception of what is actually convenient and what is even wealth is actually wrong. And so we've had a lot of success convincing people to fill up their freezers. And I don't think I've been asked about why is your meat frozen for 2 years. It's just something that the consumers accept.
Okay, nice.
No, yeah, it needs to be. Yeah, I mean, are you able to ship out to Perth? If you ever do like a pallet out to Perth, or is it only Brisbane so far?
Well, I haven't gone that far west, but I do get asked a lot in Perth. And basically, all it would need would someone to be to pack a pallet. So if I can get a 4x4 pallet and pack it, 4 to 6 foot tall and put about $10,000 worth of produce on it, then your freight $400, $500, $600 isn't really a big deal, and we can get it over there. But boxes that far west are challenging. I haven't even been able to get to Adelaide. So at the moment, if you buy off our .com, we ship down to Melbourne postcodes. If you contact me direct, I can ship to South Coast, Canberra, and Sydney. But outside of that, it's just by the pallet at the moment, which requires a few extra phone calls generally. All the freight agencies hate me.
Yeah, I bet. Well, that's good, and like you say, it's something that can be scalable. And as this goes up, you have different areas that you can ship it to, and become more economical to do that for both parties. I always sort of ask this to some people that grow their own cattle. But have you ever done this with like older meat and like older cows? Like if you're taking it out of a herd or something like that, have you ever tried like older meat? Because like I got a cow I heard about this like in Italy, where they think that everyone else is just eating veal basically, and they'll eat like 10, 15-year-old cows. That's a normal thing for them. And the intensity of the flavors just beyond anything that you'd find otherwise. And I did that once. I went to a rancher and just said, hey, I want a whole cow, just been eating grass its whole life, just the oldest one you got. And they had one that was 10 years old that we're going to take out of the herd. It was the best damn meat I've ever had in my entire life. It was just amazing. It wasn't tough. It wasn't difficult to chew or anything like that. I mean, I cook things rare to medium rare at most anyway, and so that might have something to do with it. But I thought that the flavor of the meat was just incredible, and just dark yellow, rich fat and everything like that. It's just amazing. So I don't know. Have you ever experimented with anything like that?
We push everything older than the industry works towards. And I've actually got a line of beef on my website called double aged dairy beef. So I actually go to the local dairy and I buy retiring Jersey milking cows. So I buy these jerseys they're normally between 5 and 8 years old. I only want cows that have missed their breeding cycle and they're out of sync, because the dairies offload animals for a range of reasons. There'll be recurring mastitis, foot abscess, pink eye, cancer, all this stuff. I don't want to inherit all these issues, because when you're in a system that doesn't use medical intervention with pharmaceuticals like ours, you have to start with the healthiest base animal you can. So we just take these animals that aren't fertile anymore. We join them with our mob. In our mob, we run a bull in every day of the year, multiple bulls actually. Then we preg test these animals 10 weeks later. So we give them a 10-week joining, and everyone that's empty gets marked and then grass finished to go off for processing. So quite often we have about a 40% cull rate out of that 10-week joining. I don't know if that means anything to you, but someone listening gets it. So those animals, they've come out of a dairy where they've had a mixed feed their whole life, right? They've had a bit of grain, they've had a bit of silage, they've had a bit of whatever it is. So we don't sell it under our grass-fed and finished label. But they're quite often, like you said, I think the oldest one I've done is 14 years old. We grass finish them it's normally a minimum of about 6 months on our farm. And then when we get to the butchery, we generally hang them 3 to 4 weeks in the cool room just to really let that meat relax. It's been standing up a long time, just give it a break, let it hang out for a while. And that line of meat in our label is the most polarizing out of all the meats, all the produce we do, because some people buy it and they go, that's not for me, I can't have that anymore. But do you know why? They say it tastes too beefy. See, we've been brainwashed as a society to want bland, moist food. Like if you actually look up these feedlot chicken factories, like your Ingrams and your Hazeldeans, these big boys that put out all the $8 chickens, Matt Evans, on his book on eating meat, wrote about how he found they had internal notes that they would use to breed towards benchmarks of palatableness of the food. And two of them were bland and it was bland, moist, and tender, I think, were their things they were striving towards. So when people buy this dairy beef and go, I can't handle it, it's too beefy. Like, well, that's what food tastes like. Like, we're going back to real old food here. But on the flip side, no restaurants want my beef, because you can get grass-fed and finished beef, which is all just commoditized. You know, you can get grass-fed and finished beef from an animal that spent the last 4 months of its life in a feedlot getting fed lucerne pellets. You know, so it's not a great claim. So I can't compete with that. But when I get these fine dining restaurants that try my aged Jersey beef, they go mental on it. We're supplying a 2-chef hat restaurant in Beechworth here, Provenance, who does set menu, Japanese style, and he absolutely loves the dairy beef. He holds every single rump I process. He takes every single whole rump.
Nice. Yeah.
What do you, Jake? What are you eating yourself? Do you go for the dairy? I mean, because you can have whatever you want from the butcher shop, I assume.
Sure. Yeah, we eat a lot of the dairy. It's not as widely available. Like, we're processing our grass bodies all year long. The dairy beef comes in 2 batches a year because the dairies destock twice a year. So we've got like a 6-month lag after their destocking, if that makes sense, when we get it on and finish it. And it does sell really well. Like, the consumers go nuts on it. And I don't like to get in the way of sales, but we as a flavor profile, dairy is our preference at the moment.
Yeah, that was exactly what I noticed. I did a taste test between like a New York strip, like prime New York strips. In America, they have prime choice and all that sort of stuff. So prime is the top one. It has best marbling, best fat. And so prime New York strip, and I had the older cow New York as well. It didn't have the marbling, just had a fat, rim around it. And so I started eating the prime cut, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. I love this. I just love just meat all the time. It's amazing. And then I tried the older cow, and I was like, God, this is so good too. This is just so amazing. And I just ate another bite of that, another bite of that, another bite of that. And I was like, all right, I'll try the other one again, get a comparison again. I could not taste the meat in the prime cut. I couldn't taste it. I couldn't taste any beefy. It just tasted rich because it had a lot more fat, but I could not taste any beef flavors. It completely overpowered it. And I really like that. I like beef. I like the taste of beef. And so for me, that was perfect. And so
if you go back in history a couple hundred years, you look at the cowboys pushing the cattle across the country. A finished steer back then was 4 years old.
Right.
We're reading animals as young
now?
as 16 months now.
Yeah.
You could get some animals as young as 16 months. I've processed some grass finished animals at 16 months that I think were exceptional. Normally it's probably closer to 18 to 20. But then you've got the other end of the spectrum. You've got Wagyu cows that have been finished in a feedlot for 600 days. I saw somebody talking about on social media the other day. So they're standing in a feedlot for almost 2 years.
Yeah, well,
getting sick, getting cancers,
Yeah. Well, and also just doing all that. Yeah, that muscle, that intramuscular fat, that marbling, like that's from the carbs and the grains and things like that. That's what people forget, and we eat carbs and grains. That happens to us as well. Like, you want muscles, or you want, like grass finished, no marbling muscles. Like, that's what I want.
Yeah, 100%.
I sent a photo of us. This got me in trouble online, and I had a few Wagyu ranchers slide into my DMs and tell me to pull my head in. But I sent a photo of a Wagyu Scotch, incredibly marbled ribeye, to a doctor friend, and I said, if you MRI'd a patient and their muscle came back like this, what would you say? And he responded, elderly pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
At best.
Yeah.
And so I put that on Twitter and got in trouble.
So we do see that. We do see that on MRIs, and quite a lot of times you'll see this. You'll see like the different muscles around the backs, the paraspinal muscles and everything around that. So we're looking at the spine, but you actually see a lot of fat, intramuscular fat in there. There's a lot of marbling, and I was speaking to someone. They said that they were at a conference and someone was presenting on back pain in general, and they found that was a very, very strong correlation with back pain, was a lot of intramuscular fat in those paraspinal muscles. And you think about it, like, there's not a lot of strong muscles that are holding everything together, are holding the joints together, so they're just rickety and creaky. And we know from arthritis in general that the stronger your muscles are around that joint, the more protected they are, the less pain you have. And so when you have all this intramuscular fat, that's not good for you. And you have a lot of back pain, you have a lot of other problems as well. And that comes from eating grains. Just the same thing that would happen to a Wagyu cow. The way you get that Wagyu marbling, that's the same way that we'll get that marbling. It's the same thing. And just the fact that people don't recognize that and realize that is shocking to me, because of course the same thing is going to happen to both.
There is a genetic aspect of the Wagyu's predisposition to marbling, and they can be incredibly marbled on grass, not to the level that you see on Google Images for Wagyu, but I've actually partnered up with a grass-fed and grass-finished Wagyu producer in Queensland. I can't name who they are because they're wanting to remain anonymous, but we're going to be doing a mineral benchmark on a nutrition panel on the meat, and then benchmark it against my animals. We're going to be looking at cortisol as a benchmark for stress, and we're going to be looking at urea, which is a personal interest of mine because the cattle that I use in Nguni have got a urea level close to a goat, which is another whole rabbit hole we can go to. And we're going to compare fatty acids and that sort of thing. And then I'm trying to find a Wagyu feedlotter that will let me test their animal and do these animals that have been eating corn for 200 days, because I'm really interested, because you can get a very marbled Wagyu out of the paddock with grass, but it's, and I just want to see how all that works. It's just a really interesting topic to me, because you look at the nutritional, vigor out of different foods, and all the most highly prized, most beneficial foods are quite often these wild harvest, very lean animals, your elk and your deer and things. And I'm pro fat, we run tallow in our deep fryer at the cafe. So it's a little bit of cognitive dissonance that I'm trying to work through in my own head as to why I'm pro fat, but the leaner animals do better. We're trying to sort it out.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. I was talking to a rancher when I first got to Australia, and they were saying that the whole push on getting away from fat being bad, actually led the market to, they started breeding out fattier strains. And so they started breeding leaner and leaner cows. And so like he was saying, it's like, we ruined the livestock in Australia. We bred for these super lean things, and now they don't have as much fat. And then people say, oh, well, now you have to grain finish them. It's like, well, what do you want? Do you want the fat, or don't you? Like, where the hell are you going?
Well, this is the power of knowing your customer and not selling into the, not selling into a market that just blows with the wind, and like our customers, health conscious, whole foods based, and they don't really seem to care. Like when I sell a steak, sometimes they're fattier than other times, but they're not buying it for the flavor, and they're not necessarily buying it for the fat content. They're buying it because of the stewardship that the animal received during its life.
Yeah. And that's another thing too. There's that reason, you treat an animal badly in these feedlots and things like that. And that's not a nice thing. So people can vote with their pocketbook as well. And they can go towards people like yourself that, they know that this animal had a great life, and probably a longer life than most other animals as well.
100%.
Yeah. Especially with the dairy cows, if you end up being able to ship out to Perth, let me know. We'll get one of those dairy cows.
I'll look into it. There's always cows coming through. And even the beef breed, I've got shorthorn cows in my herd that I'm culling. They're sort of starting to finish their breeding careers, and most of them are between 8 and 10 as well. And the meat's awesome.
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Older the better. Yeah. Whatever you got. And even the ones that, especially like the ones that you've had that's just grass their whole life, like that's even better, I think.
Yeah. Just collecting those nutrients for, a decade.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Imagine how much sunshine's in that cow.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, vitamin D, energy, stored nutrients.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, very cool. And so you said you have the Nguni cattle. Is that a special breed?
Yeah, so it's a breed of animals from South Australia. They're quite a different cow, and so on the farm we've got our 5 pillars of production that we use to guide our decision making and drive our principles. So we've got animal welfare, environmental stewardship, creating healing food, building community, making money. They're our 5 principles. And animal welfare is probably the biggest thing that I spend the most time trying to level up and think through. And in our current system, welfare is an outcome-based metric. So they would look at a free-range chicken farm and say that their their losses, their bird deaths are higher than a caged chicken farm. So therefore, the industry is lobbying and arguing that the caged chickens are in a better welfare environment, because the outcome is they're sick less often, whatever. They don't care about the chicken can't express its nature and flap its wings or sit on a perch or have some fresh water or have some sunshine even. So for me, welfare very much has to be respecting the context of the animal. So for a pig to have a wallow, a chicken to have a perch. But then when you start putting these animals in those environments, a lot of the animals that our industries have bred for the last 50 years can no longer handle the environments that they once came from. So if you empty a factory farm full of pigs, all these pink-skinned pigs, and put them out in a field where they had to deal with all these different bacterias and fungus and birds carrying different bugs, and then the sunshine alone, these animals just shrivel up. They just can't handle it. So this brought me back to the starting post. And I'm like, if I want to really say I'm performing a high level of animal welfare, I need to be starting with an animal that's fit for purpose, a rugged animal that can handle the natural environments and is as close to its wild counterparts as it can be. So these Ngunis have only been domesticated by the Westerners, I guess, probably not the right word, but they've only been acquired by the Westerners rather reasonably, the last, 40, 50 years or so.
Yeah.
And the South African Afrikaans that got these bloodlines traded them off the Nguni people and the Zulu tribes. These are their tribal animals. So You've got, up until very recently, you've got animals that have lived hand in hand. They've lived lockstep with humans, but with no pasture improvements, with no pesticides, with no drenching, just for these migratory people, and the animals have been with them. And so they're smaller. They're a smaller frame size, so they're better with feed efficiencies. They're incredibly fertile, so it's quite common to have your first calf land on the ground from a mum who's 18 months old. Now, in Western breeding cycles, you join your cow at 18 months old, hoping for a calf when she's 2 years old, a bit over 2 years old. So you've sped up this breeding cycle a whole year because of how vigorous the health of this animal is. Easy calving, pulling calves is a nonsense. We talked about it before with people for different pregnancy issues that women have. Like, why would nature have a system where the calf gets stuck when it's halfway out? It's just not. It's not something that would have been common in nature. And in our farming landscapes. Like, I've spoken to a farm once who breeds a type of cow called a Hereford, and one year he had a 40% pull rate. 4 out of 10 calves he had to pull out of his cows. So these are all little things. When I started learning about the Nguni, I was like, tick, tick, tick. They've got all these great attributes. They've got 80 different colors in their hides. So I want to start evaluating to my animals and selling tanned hides. And instead of having a black cow where you've got one catalog item, which is a black hide, now I've got an open access to 80 hides. So they've got big horns on them.
Yeah, they're like, it's like every coat is like unique artwork, you can sort of
barcodes.
Yeah, but no this is the real NFT. Imagine that.
That's right.
Yeah, there's that. That's the thing too. You're saying about like, we're breeding these things like bulldogs and things like British bulldogs and things like that. Like, you almost can't like breed these things normally. You have to do cesareans. Like, I mean, come on now. You've destroyed that animal.
100%.
And so we as humans are having some more trouble now as well, because we're having higher birth weight and higher head size and head circumference and things like that. And people are saying that, well, this is because our brains are just getting bigger. Like, really? In the last 80 years? Like, probably not. And also you contrast that with the adult cranial capacity is actually smaller. Our brain sizes are 11% smaller now than they were before the agricultural revolution. So our brains are not getting bigger. It's just that our infant fetus sizes are growing precociously, because I think we're feeding them a bunch of carbohydrates and sugar that's just dumping in a bunch of insulin, stuff like that, and causing them to grow more than they should for that period in their life. And then all of a sudden they're getting stuck, and you have to get instrumented deliveries like forceps or switching to cesareans and things like that. And like you say, how does that happen in nature? How are we doing that 100,000 years ago? You're just going to die, And so women that were having babies that were that big, they just die. They didn't have the hip capacity to do that. They were going to die. And that was a major thing up until very recently, when obstetrics became a much more had much more technologies and things available to it that were able to do that. But like you say, like it's not natural to have a baby not be able to be born without intervention. And so I think the same thing can apply to us as well. We're eating the wrong thing, we're doing the wrong things, and that's going to affect our babies as well. And so that's really cool about the Nguni cow, though. I hadn't heard about them before.
Me neither. You have got me totally hooked on Nguni cattle. That's freaking awesome.
I'm very bullish on the Nguni cattle, pardon the pun. But I just think if you're the sort of consumer that wants an animal that's organic and hasn't been drenched, and then you go down the rabbit hole and you want an animal that's holistically managed by Allan Savoury's grazing plans, to me, it's a natural progression to why not have an animal that's more efficient in the paddock. So my Nguni cow eats 2.5% of her body weight of grass every day for maintenance. If you benchmark that against my shorthorn cow in the paddock, that cow eats 4% for body maintenance. And when you contrast the weight difference between the two cows, I can run 2 to 1.
Yeah.
I can almost run 3 to 1, actually. It's more like 2.6.
It's just way
the
more
weight
efficient.
difference. So then you've got this whole green agenda, and whether you want to buy into that or not, it's completely by the by. It's you've literally got a cow that's more environmentally friendly because it eats less to live. So you can have that. The answer there isn't so you don't need as many cows. The answer is you can have more cows and feed more people.
And Anthony's very worried about the carbon dioxides in the atmosphere. So
absolutely, petrified. It keeps me up at night.
Yeah,
well, the world's getting greener, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. I pointed that out to someone, and I said that, like, actually, since the Industrial Revolution, CO2 levels have gone up, which actually averted a disaster. There was, all flowering plants evolved at a time when CO2 was 10 times what it is now. And if it gets below 150 parts per million, they will all go extinct. They will all die out. That's it. That's a major extinction event on the world, akin to all these different extinction episodes throughout history. And so we were actually getting dangerously close to that. We were under 200 parts per million for the agricultural revolution, and then that came in, and that got us away from that. So there's a lot of people, a lot of experts, a lot of Nobel Prize winners in physics and mathematics, and people who came up with all the climate models and things like that, who did the math, who actually made these themselves. They're saying that, like, actually that's probably not a bad thing, and since CO2 levels have gone up, the world is greener, as you say. There's a lot more biomass, there's a lot more plant life, there's a lot more algae, there's a lot more organisms that are using photosynthesis to live, and that's the basis of the food chain, and then everything goes up from there. And if you have a strong base of a food chain, then everything else benefits from that. And I was talking to someone about this in my medical school, and I was just sort of pointing this out, and said that there were images from satellites looking at the Sahara Desert, and it is now turning green. Is turning green from space. It's like, that's the Sahara Desert. That's not normally green, and so it's now green for the first time. And her response to that is like, is the Sahara Desert supposed to be green, or is it supposed to be a desert? And I was like, okay, so
can't win.
That's the end of that conversation. Like, this is not going to go anywhere. But in fact, it's supposed to be green, because before agriculture, before Savory thinks that it's livestock mismanagement that created the big deserts. I think it's the exact opposite. I think it's the farmland. There's all these areas that turned into deserts, like what is modern day Iraq, and Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Sahara Desert. These were the origins of agriculture. And when you're stripping these nutrients away from the ground, and you're tilling the soil, and you're losing topsoil, you're going to make things go barren. And that's, I think, exactly what happened. You had the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. You read Gilgamesh, it talks about these savannas and deer and cedar forests and things like that, is what modern day Iraq. Now that's where they started farming, and that's where they just wiped it out into desert. The Sahara Desert used to be, again, jungle. Egypt used to be jungle. They took soil samples underneath the pyramids and the Sphinx. They found that that's actually that they were built in jungles. Those were jungle pyramids. Those were jungle people. So all these like movies about, the 10 Commandments and things like that. And like everyone's always Egypt and everyone's like desert and walking around. Like, no, that's not what it was. Those were jungles. And they think they've wiped them out because of this agriculture and which happened in the middle of America during the Dust Bowl in the early 19th century, or 1900s, I should say, 20th century. And that was turning into a desert. We almost had our own Sahara Desert in the middle of America, which was one of the most, fecund and fertile areas of the world. It had hundreds of millions of buffalo and other big animals going throughout there. The grass was, 10, 12 feet tall. And the topsoil was, like, I don't know, 10 or 12 feet thick. It just went down forever. And we almost destroyed that. We almost turned that into a desert. And they figured it out. This is from, chilling crops, and rain and wind blows these stuff away, washes this stuff away, and we're losing all the topsoil. And that's what it was. And then we changed our farming practices and it helped. But, the Sahara Desert used to be, very green and vibrant. And we've seen again in satellite images with infrared sort of imaging, there's actually like settlements and cities like all throughout what is now the Sahara Desert, right? And so the Sahara Desert is supposed to be green. And I think that that's directly from inappropriate farming techniques that we used historically and that we've tried to mitigate now. But even with the current farming techniques that we have, we are still losing 27.5 billion tons of topsoil a year. And Savory talks about this. He talks about how much topsoil is being lost from this. So, but I think he's still sort of in that mindset of what he was taught, that, oh, animals are bad, animals are bad. But he got away from that and said, no, animals aren't bad. I'm seeing the opposite. But he still learned that, oh, animals cause these deserts. But he knows that they don't cause deserts. He knows that they reverse deserts. So I hopefully he'll come around to that. But I think it's the agriculture, the plants that plant crops that have done that and have really just destroyed the land. And I think that going back to animal-based agriculture and the regenerative farming model that you're doing is only going to be beneficial to the environment, to the world, and to our health in general.
Well, I think the agricultural communities that get involved in those heavy tillage practices work like that they would have been synonymous with set stocked farming, just leaving cattle in the same area, leaving animals in the same area. So it just comes down to, once again, to mismanagement, doesn't it? And you can't begrudge these people for it because they didn't know any better. They were just feeding themselves. But right now, today, we've got the tools, we've got the knowledge. You can prove it. When I do my farm tours, I show people go out early in the morning. I've got one this Sunday coming up. We have about 50 people come on the farm monthly. And we walk out in the paddock and it'll be, 7:30 in the morning. So the grass will still have dew on it. It'll still be wet from the night. And if you sit down, you'll be saturated. And if you dig under the leaves of the grass, the ground will all be moist and it'll be like chocolate. But then immediately next to it, where the road starts, where we drive our tractor into the paddock, right where all the vegetation finishes, it's dust and cracked earth. Mm-hmm. And the only difference is ground cover. And the only difference that those two pieces of land have is different management and use. One, we fence off and we graze, and the other one we drive on 4 times a day and it gets compacted and everything dies. And you can just see it night and day. And when you point this out to people and show them right in your eyes, and they understand the power of maintaining ground cover, because we like to say Mother Nature's modest. She wants to cover herself. So, don't leave her soil bare, let her put some clothes on. And you graze things to the level that they become a desert by constant pressure. So to give you an idea, our stocking density on our farm at the moment is 60,000 kilograms of live animals per hectare, being 10,000 meters squared. So I don't have 60,000 kilograms of animals in a hectare. My mob weighs a bit over 20,000 kilos combined, and we're grazing them in about a third of a hectare paddocks at the moment, moving them every day. But do you see how I get that number? And I've got so much grass on my farm, I don't know what to do at all. Our stocking rate's really high. Neighboring farms around the place at the moment would be having something to maybe 15,000 kilograms of 15 to 20,000 kilograms of animals to 40 hectares. because all the gates are open and the animals have access to the whole farm. So we need to flip that. What would it be? That'd be not 1,500 kilos a hectare. It'd be 150 kilos a hectare. And they've got no grass. One of my neighbors just started buying hay. So I'm 20,000 kilos a hectare and they're 150 kilos a hectare. Similar amounts of animals on a similar amount of land, but one's got a lot of grass and one doesn't. And it just comes down to the management of the animals and the recovery. I know I sort of spat a little bit of data out there. I hope it made sense, but I'm just trying to illustrate.
We get the picture.
It's not the cow, it's the how, and we know how to do it. We've got these skills. It's provable. We can go in the field and do it.
Yeah. Have you talked to your neighbors about getting on board with this, or they just don't want to?
Well, look, all my neighbors are beautiful people, soul of the earth, helped me out many times over the years. But everyone's context is different ages, different physical health, different, financial obligations. And the worst paddock in my street has horses in it. Horse paddocks are the worst paddocks you'll ever see because they don't look at a paddock for food, the horse owners, they look at a paddock for space. So they just leave the horses in there in these reasonable, a horse might have an acre and it's in there all the time and they bring the food to the horse. They bring out its pellets and it's loose and it just ends up being weeds, 6 meters tall and thistles and burrs and things. Right. But look, you're never a prophet in your own land. So you get on the podcast and you do your farm tours and you touch people who are ready to hear the message.
Yeah.
And one of my mantras is path of least resistance. So instead of bashing my head against the neighbor's door and trying to convert their 100 acres, I could have a really easy conversation with somebody and shift their paradigm. And maybe they've got 20,000 acres down the road and we can start making some real change.
Yeah, definitely. Well, very cool.
Great approach. Jake, this has been awesome, mate. We really appreciate it. How can people find you?
So we're wolkifarm.com.au. I'm on Twitter, Jake Wolki, Facebook, Instagram. We're all over the place, but we're shipping now to Melbourne. You can buy boxes from our website. We'll drop it to you straight in Melbourne. Or if you want something Sydney, Canberra, South Coast, you can just email me, jakewolki@gmail.com, and I'll sort you out. Pretty easy to find.
Awesome. Sounds good, man. I'm looking forward to when you can ship to Perth.
Thanks a lot for having me. And I'm gonna get straight on the phone 9 a.m. Monday morning and figure out how to fill a truckload up. How many pallets can you handle?
Jesus. So how much would go into a pallet?
Quite a few hundred kilos. You need to rally up all your carnivore friends and family and get this truck full.
I could probably rally some of the troops and
let's do it.
Let me know what sort of the minimum sort of bulk purchase you can do, and I'll see if I can scrounge up the troops.
I've got him squirming now. I love it.
So it's all going to be dumped in your driveway. Like, shit, what am I going to do with all this?
We'll work towards something. I'd love the honor to supply some more doctors. I've got a lot of doctors on my list, and that for me is encouraging and validating. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Well, awesome. Well, you do great work, man. It's really interesting to talk to you and get an idea of what you're doing and how much of an impact it's making. And hopefully people will, support what you're doing, and that will just grow that, and more people will find that this is a not only a viable but a thriving line of business, and that will just help everyone.
Can't wait.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jake. Really appreciate it.